The U.S. Treasury put out a projection, which I tweeted last week, originally shared on Twitter by Lynn Alden. This is the U.S. Treasury's forecast of debt held by the United States over time. And the assumptions in this forecast are we've got a certain amount of debt today, and we're running Social Security and Medicare forward without cuts. And so what happens as we make these Social Security, Medicare payments, and we accrue and pay interest on the debt that we hold today, and we don't change the tax rates in this country, and this is what happens. So it's a runaway kind of debt scenario, and the U.S., by definition, has to default at some point because you cannot tax every dollar of the economy at 100% at some point. And so, there are two ways this can go. The first way is you have to cut back on these major kind of, expense commitments that naturally balloon over time. And that is Social Security and Medicare. And the other one is that you just tax a lot more. And when you tax a lot more, economic growth gets affected, and it makes it really hard to eventually pay off that debt, and the debt continues to spiral. So I think what we saw was, number one, the announcement by Biden, hey, Republicans are the ones who want to cut Social Security and Medicare. And they all screamed and they said, no way, we'll never do that. And a lot of them did interviews afterwards and said it's total BS that Biden would say that, which I think supports what the polls have shown, which is on both sides of the aisle. People do not want to see Social Security and Medicare cut in any way right now. That means you can't, and you guys saw what happened in France, where they pushed back the retirement age by 2 years, and there was effectively riots across the country. I don't know if you guys saw this a few weeks ago. We didn't talk about it, but it was pretty brutal, pretty ugly. And so this is a real cost that's coming bare. It's coming bare in the United States, not just with the publicly funded Social Security and Medicare programs, but also with a lot of the private pensions that are going to need to get bailed out with the same federal money, because they're not going to let those things go bankrupt. And that's another $1 trillion plus of liabilities. So that cost is going to balloon. And the only solution at that point is to introduce massive tax hikes. And so they propose this billionaire tax, this tax on unrecognized capital gains. It is literally, if you keep Social Security and Medicare where they are, and you don't pay down the debt, and you don't grow the economy fast enough, you have to introduce significant tax hikes across corporate and the individual taxpayer base. If you zoom out, it really indicates this steepening curve that the U.S. has to climb its way out of. And as you tax more, there's less to invest in the economic growth. The government is a far worse investor in economic growth than the free market. And that means that we can't grow our way out and grow GDP enough to ultimately cover our debt obligations. And this is what Dalio's book that I mentioned in 2021 was so kind of importantly sharing. This is a multi-100-year cycle, and the last couple decades get really nasty. And this chart, which is a forecast from the actual U.S. Treasury, highlights the problem. And the comments made at the Congress, in front of the Congress this week by the President of the United States, indicates how serious of a problem this is going to be, because no one wants to cut these major cost obligations that we have coming due. You can't have it all. You can't have low taxes and have these entitlement programs and have this level of spending. It's impossible. You have to tax. That's the only way. Or you have to cut the entitlement programs, or you have to cut the spending. You got to zoom out and stop thinking about the yearly cycle and the election cycle on this stuff, and just look at where we're headed over a multi-decade cycle. And there's just no resolution to this problem. If you can get the cost of energy in this country to drop by 50 to 75%, and you can increase energy capacity by 10 to 20 fold, then you have a fighting chance, because you can actually grow the economy out of the problem. And that's really where I am optimistic and excited about opportunities like fusion. And you guys can make fun of me all you want. But if we can get to a point where we can increment energy capacity by an order of magnitude, there is economic growth that will arise from that. And that's how we can grow our way out of the debt, entitlement, tax problem, where one of those three things has to give in the absence of that. If we can increase energy capacity in this country by 10x, if we can, we have a path out of the entitlement, tax, debt problem. Otherwise, one of those three things is going to give, and it's going to be ugly. You know what the budget per capita is of the city of San Francisco? So how much the city spends per year divided by the number of people that live in the city? It's $18,000 per citizen per year. That's how much the city of San Francisco spends. A third of that money, by the way, 25% goes to public health care. Now, when you look at that $18,000 budget per capita, it is more than every single state of the union on a per capita basis, except Oregon and North Dakota, which have very weird budgets. So San Francisco spends more than every other state per capita. It spends more in aggregate than 16 US states. And the federal budget per capita is $15,000. The federal government's budget per capita is $15,000. So San Francisco spends more than 15 states and spends more per capita than every other state except 2, and spends more than the federal government per capita. And I think that really highlights, and you need to tax the base to do that. And now we are seeing San Francisco is the largest population exodus of any city and business exodus of any city in the United States. That is your predictor. That is your predictor of where this goes.